Start immediately. The first part will be held in English, and then the second part will be held mainly in Italian, except few questions, just in case. I will keep it brief. The time is really strict. So let me introduce the first of our guests, Jean-Pierre Lamblin, with a presentation regarding the situation of pollution in the European region in general. Let's say that what we will try to do in this panel is to approach the matter of energy transition either from a general point of view, policy point of view, and with more specific example and more detailed experience. Mainly this will be held in the second part of the panel. Since time is strict, I will not keep it long. Let me introduce you Jean-Pierre Lamblin with our first speech. Jean-Pierre, if you want to go to the...
Okay. Thank you very much to all the people to attend this event. And I thank a lot the organizer to invite me to explain how the renewable energy communities will totally change the game for the shore power and for the electrification, of the port operation. So first of all, when we speak about shore power and port emission, we have to know what it's about. And for this, I apply a methodology to calculate the emission of the ports from the MRV report. MRV report, it's a European regulation which say that all the vessels calling the European port have to declare their emission on a different segment, including the berth emission of CO2. From this record of MRV, we can calculate first, I apply a growing factor on this emission based on a study of Transport Environment NGO organization, which last year explained that if we include the over 400 tons of vessel in this record, we will increase the emission of the vessel, of MRV, by 21%. Actually, the MRV regulation is only for vessel over 5,000 tons. So that means when you apply this percentage of increase of emission, you have something like 8 million something tons of CO2. And when you apply the European Environment Agency emission factor of MGO, which is the bunker mandatory for any vessel calling European port, you can calculate the consuming of marine gas oil. And from it, if you divide by the number of tons, by the 300 million tons of cargo, that means that you are able to calculate the average number of kilo per ton handled by ports. Then we have to consider also the energy that we need. And for this, I use a study of the Port of Valencia until 2016, who run a study with the Politecnica University of Valencia, based on the report and voluntary report of operators. And from it, they calculate three segments, so everything regarding the handling equipment and so on. The second segment is regarding the movement within the terminal, trucks, rails, and barge. And the third segment is the burst emission. That means the vessel one. And so we know by this study, by dividing the same the energy need by the total tonnage handled by the Port of Valencia, we have a number of kilowatt need to handle 1 ton of cargo. So by this way, that means that for Europe, for example, we have a total need of 3,014 megawatt of energy for all European ports. So now I'm back to some point that has been discussed this morning during the different table. And the fact that 2 years ago, when I attended these events in La Spezia, there was a discussion between the Royal Caribbean representative and the Port of Antwerp regarding the cost comparison between the MGO and the electricity. And at that time, that was right, the cost of MGO equivalent in terms of kilowatt was around 10 cents. But now, with new regulation, first, from the development of the cost of the MGO, second, from the application and integration of shipping CO2 emission in emission trading system, ETS, of Europe, the cost of MGO will be increased a lot. And from 2026, in fact, the cost of MGO is equivalent to 0.22 euro per kilowatt hour, instead of 2 years ago of 10 cents. Just one details regarding the ETS. The ETS mentioned that the allowance of CO2 will be payable by stage, fully payable, 100% of payable in 2026 for the burst emission. And actually, the cost of 1 ton of CO2 is around 90 euro. And so that means that, in fact, it's add around 270 euro to each ton of bunker. So this is what I gave this remark because this morning there was one participant who considered that the ETS was not so suitable, and that it was better to consider to apply a bunker surcharge to pay the innovation and so on. And he mentioned that it was around 50 US dollars to apply this bunker. But we see here that the ETS is much more important than this surcharge. And what I insist on the ETS is that the ETS is not a tax, it's a contribution. Because almost 60% of the revenue of ETS go back for innovation, transition, energy transition, sorry, for ship owners, but for European ship owners and for European ports. So that means that everybody pays, but the European ship owners and the European port get back the funding. So now we were speaking about the network price, the electricity network price. But from almost 1 year now, there were big development of renewable energy, and the cost of this renewable energy decreased a lot. So we have around 3 cents per kilowatt hour for wave. We have around 5 cents for the solar, and we have around 6 cents for offshore wind. So that means that if any community energy is supplied by renewable energy, local one, as mentioned in the Prevents workshop, that means that there was some margin first for the community to save money and to get profitability by the mix of energy they can handle. And second, this community can resell the energy to the port, and the same port can resell to the shipping line and to the operator of the vessel for providing electricity, and apply the same price as the operator can expect to pay. That means the actual cost of the MGO plus the carbon tax. So by this way, the port can generate additional revenue as present revenue, and can pay back faster their investment in shore power.
Jean-Pierre, I'm sorry, but we are running out of time.
Finish.
Oh, I'm completely out of line, but I really appreciate your presentation, because giving number bring us back to something that keeps coming in the picture during the morning and during the discussion. It's not enough to have cold ironing, to have the structure to supply electricity to the ships in the harbor. It's part of the problem, but we also have to find a way to make this sustainable on an economical level. So the next speech is going to be done by Lucas Bosser. We have been discussing about this. It will be about policy, and now I have to put the hat of my job. You know, I'm a transition manager and energy manager for a logistic company. You are talking about policy in a way and in a broader scope. Are these policy heading and working only for port, harbor in a strict way of definition, or transport will be somehow included in this issue? I leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Luca. Thank you for your presence today, all of you. Before starting to answer your question, just briefly, I would explain from where I'm talking. I'm working for the Conference of Peripheral Maritime Regions, which is an association of regional authorities that gather regions all across Europe from an extended geographical point of view, not only focusing on the EU, so we have members outside of the EU, of course. So naturally, our members being both peripheral and maritime, we have a strong interest to the development of their ports and what's happening there, and the fact that those regions are able to be connected through maritime transport, among other modes. So to get back to your questions, I would answer it 2 ways. One, looking at the challenge of decarbonization itself. I'll stating the obvious, just that all ports authorities throughout Europe and all maritime peripheral regions wants the air around the airports to be clean. They want transport to be decarbonized, not to have a wrongful impact on the environment and the surroundings of the ports. I know it's stating the obvious, but still. So there is a global European context that have been mentioned with the inclusion of maritime transport within the European de-emission trading system, sorry. There's basically a whole package at the European level called the Fit for 55 package, aiming to reach the objective of the 55%. That includes several legislation that have a really strong impact on ports and maritime transport. The ETS was mentioned. There is also the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation and the fuel maritime, for instance, where the whole dockside electrification is integrated and so on and so forth. In general, we're extremely positive towards those initiatives, and we do believe that it's really important that the EU takes a strong step in this regard. We do see those texts and this package as a whole as an interesting step towards a more ambitious policy at the European level. We do believe as well that it's important what it brings to the private sector and to the maritime and port sector as a whole in terms of visibility and legal certainty and harmonization on the long term, to make sure that there's a match between, let's say, the ship owners and the ports to harmonize what is needed on the one side and what is offered on the other. We do believe that's very important. A small comment from our perspective in this regard would be that there's a tendency to forget peripheral maritime regions, the islands, for instance, that tend to be seen as a place where electrification, for instance, is extremely challenging for good reasons. That basically, as we stand today, for an island, it's impossible to provide enough clean, let's call it clean electricity or clean energy to a boat to ensure onshore power supply. So therefore, it would demand using heavy fuels to produce this electricity, and therefore wouldn't make any sense from a sustainable perspective. However, what we would like to see is an encouragement from the EU to develop some innovative projects in those areas that are always exempted, always kind of left aside of the legislation. And in terms of what we need, we will end up to the problem that comes up all the time when we talk about decarbonizing transport as a whole, about sustainability, about infrastructure, and so on and so forth. I remember having a meeting with several of our politicians last year, and a question we had in the round table was, what do you need? And he started to sing ABBA, money, money, money. So a clear challenge in this regard will be the availability of investment tools. You mentioned the resources generated by the ETS. It is indeed an interesting novelty with this new, well, the fact that the maritime transport is included in the ETS. Indeed, it should nourish the maritime sector as a whole, the ports, the shipbuilding sector as well. We see it as a very interesting step. And the other thing I would like to mention is that I'm talking a lot about challenges. I do think as well that the whole energy transition is an opportunity for ports, for maritime transport as well. There are some innovative techniques that are being developed all across Europe. I would be able to speak about wind ships and using the wind energy to move ships a lot, but today is not the day. Just wanted to mention that something very important that needs to be done is to better acknowledge the role of ports as hubs for the energy transition and renewable energy. It was mentioned during the session before. There's clearly a movement in this direction, both because more and more ports have strategies in terms of developing renewable energy, whether it's offshore wind, solar, tidal or wave energy and so on, you name it, there are a lot of those. And more ports are developing strategies in this regard, and the European Union is giving more and more attention to what's happening on the ground. We would really like clearer and more structured support in this direction to facilitate the investment in ports, because to be able to fulfill their role and to exploit 100% of their capacity in supporting the transition of the EU and the independency of the EU in terms of renewable energy, we need to do tremendous investment in ports because we have to create new infrastructure to adapt existing one and so on and so forth. So it will be extremely important to support them in doing so. One last word in this regard, that if you would have asked me how the European actors feel about the need to acknowledge the role of ports in the energy transition and really embrace it, I would say, but everybody agrees about that. But a few weeks back, there was a debate in the Transport Committee of the European Parliament where they were discussing the Trans-European Network for Transport, which is the regulation that sets basically the investment priorities for the EU in terms of transport infrastructure, where there is obviously a chapter on ports. And the suggestion was to acknowledge the role of ports as energy hub when assessing the relevance of a port to be part of this network. And surprisingly, at least from my perspective, a group of members of the European Parliament decided not to include it in their position, which from my perspective is quite worrying. But still, I think there is a dynamic that is rather positive as a whole in this regard.
Thank you, Lucas. I think it's really interesting, and this again brings something up, which is we have production, or we will have production, especially renewable energy. We will have consumption. We need to take care of transport and distribution of this electricity. One of the aim of the new policies and new regulation is also to have, as far as possible, the harbor acting as grid operator. Also because it's getting more and more difficult to integrate renewable energy and fossil fuel. Just one tricky and very fast question. Do you see any future in this matter for nuclear energy?
I will take a big joker in this regard. As an organization, we do not have an opinion or position on nuclear energy, so I will cheat a bit to answer your question. A lot of that will depend on how the French and the German will get along when it comes to negotiating everything that is related to defining what is clean and whether nuclear is or not.
And we know they can have a really different point of view on some of these issues. Okay, sorry, but I was really curious. Now, talking about the structure and how to produce electricity and energy and how to make more sustainable our harbor, I will introduce Boumediene Belagine. Please let us know what you're doing and what are the perspectives from the other side of the Mediterranean.
Okay. Thanks for inviting me to this event. So that's the second time I've been to La Spezia. The last year I've been in the academic duty with the EM-ship week in La Spezia. So this time, this invitation coincided with the, I am assessing and auditing all Algerian ports. Okay? Yeah, so we are dealing, okay, we are dealing with the port development in Algeria, which is the within a regional context and within an African context. A regional context, that means looking towards Europe. And as you may know, we have tight relation with Italy in terms of providing energy to the gas pipe we have set from Algeria to Italy. And then there is a lot of things, you know, coming regarding the port development in Algeria. So this port development in Algeria, for the time being, we are assessing all 10 commercial ports we have. The first, I already finished 5 ports. I am due to render my report by mid of July. And I'm taking 2 aspects into consideration in order not to do the same mistakes. That means I am including as a limit. First one is the numerical transition. and second one, environmental transition. That means we are considering the development of this port, existing port, within that context of taking in charge the numerical part, because it's going with the transitional part. I will give you a simple example how numerical can imply in terms of energy. And then secondly, I just showed the method of the audit. I don't have time, so I will have to go through the slides very quickly. And then the port energy transition, sustainable development, and digitalization of activities. Port, inside of port, these have an impact of saving and optimizing energy within the operation of the port. Sometimes simple solutions bring results. A lot of thinking about, developing, and so if we stick to simple, to start with, simple measures, simple procedures, that have an impact. And then that's why I'm talking about digitalization and decarbonization. But first, I just showed the position. So in the process of developing the port, because we have an access to Africa, okay, we already have a highway going to the sub-Saharan African countries. So this development will affect definitely what will be going into Africa, which I think personally will be a next challenge for the next century. That's the first thing to do. Second, that's the configuration of all the ports we have. We have mixed port, fishing port. Here I'm talking about hydrocarbon ports specialized in exporting hydrocarbon. That's the, and then about commercial ports. All the developments already done. We just received them last year, okay? So that's the extension development of container terminal for Oran Port, which we can manage to hold 1 million EVP equivalent container. That's for the port of Harzu. It's hydrocarbon. It's the most important hydrocarbon port, which has 3 liquefaction units for LNG. That's the container terminal at the east part of Algeria, which is Jinjan Port. We are extending up to 2 million EVP as well. And that's another port in the east part of Algeria. So all these developments, I'm not going. And then last, in Arzupur, we are considering, we have the authorization for the acquisition of a floating dock of 20,000 for the ship repair of the all Algerian fleet, as well as bypassing fleet, because we don't forget going through the Gibraltar Canal, the favorable way, we have what we call the Cap of Erzo. All the traffic is nearby Algerian coast because of the favorable currents. So that's one way to capture all this traffic, subject to provide good services. Okay? So one of the services we are considering now is to consider Algeria as a green corridor in terms of providing alternative fuels. Here, I'm talking about methanol, ammonia, hydrogen, because we're already exporting, we are project of exporting hydrogen to Italy. Okay, that's within the bilateral and consequently to Europe, and electricity as well to Italy. So within this context, we can consider Algeria as being a green corridor along its 1,600 kilometer coast. So that's all the steps into going towards this development, modernization, development of an information system. That's so we have the IPCS system, which rely all the ports within the ministry. So anyone working in the Ministry of Transport can have the situation of each port instantly at instant time. What is the situation? What is the berthing time? What is the time taking to treat the cargo, and so on. And then improving port connectivity, that means developing the railway infrastructure, the highway infrastructure as well. Special efforts for the storage of hazardous goods, port energy transition and sustainable development, and digitalization of activities. So all this is the background to why we started this process, digital transformation. Now, that's the auditing process we are going through. So all these are the ports and the team organization. We have a central chain, which is at the central level, and then we have regional west, center, east team. Each one, we have what we call a pilot services, a main service, which is port operation, and then we have a support function, like accountability, finance, and so on. We are auditing all three together. Why? Because each one has an implication. We can't only deal with what we will be doing through only technical aspect. We have to rely on the support aspect to see if it's financially worth, if it's not. Because the problem in Algeria now, for the time being, in terms of investment, is that the cost of energy is supported by the government. So the cost of energy is very, very low. There is availability. So it's very hard to convince people to invest in new energy, which will be costly, more expensive than what they are having now, right now. So the only, it has to be a political decision at the high level of authorities, because everything is state-owned companies. So the only option left is two options: either to say that what we are saving in terms of energy, if we are switching to renewable energy, that can be put in the export part. That means we can making money out of it because we are saving some gas, or so we can export. The second aspect through which we can convince people is doing a lot of what we call pedagogical work. Awareness about of the population about the effect of emissions and so on. So we have two aspects we have to work on it. So that's how we are organizing our. Now I come to the. We have been doing a SWOT analysis. So that's the outcome of our SWOT analysis for the project. As you can see, when it comes to trade, that's why I'm focusing. We have political and institutional factors we have to consider, poor integration of other port sectors players, change in legislation regulation, system vulnerable to cyber threats, asymmetry with the modes of transport, international financial uncertainty. That's really what matters, what has to come on the table. That's the real issue holding back some development. Now, for the port decarbonization stages, so that you are familiar to this curve. So the blue one is if we are going business as usual. That's the amount of emissions we are producing if we don't take action. If we are taking action by 2050, the gap, that represents what we are saving. Okay. Now, energy through digitalization. So, for example, the intelligent forklift, okay, working on electrical. So, if they are provided with sensors and so on, okay, we can analyze. So, when they are like stopping, and then like we have the cars, they stop at the at traffic light and then restart again. So that's one option. That's have an impact. It's a simple solution, but have an impact on this intelligent networks that can optimize all the resources all together. For example, I just gave port service vessel. I will show you one example. The development national standards for shore cold ironing. For the cold ironing in Algeria, we already have, all the ports have what we call, our electricity is produced from gas. And we know that the natural gas has been labeled as green energy. It has been labeled as green energy, as a transitional energy towards alternative fuel. So for the time being, we consider gas. So if we are providing electricity for the cold ironing as a service to vessels calling at Algerian ports, this electric energy is already between brackets green, because we are using only natural gas to produce this electricity. But the problem is sometimes is what we call the uncertainty of the grid for the distribution. That may affect the sensors on board of the ship to which we are providing electricity. That's why we are considering using LNG pack as diesel generator, but they are not diesel generator. They are gas, using the gas to provide, not from the network. So we can provide this LNG pack by quayside, respect to the ship, and then at this time we can control this electricity in terms of stability to the ship. So that's one solution we are considering, just in case we have problem with the, when we are, maybe we may have a breakdown of the grid if we are connected to the national grid or whatever. I would like to thank you. I think I'm within time, or I have 2 minutes?
You have 2 more minutes, absolutely. You're more than welcome.
2 more minutes. So all this, you know, what I've been talking about, this port development, because it is within a context of, we have 2 aspects. We have the Navy development, which is on an other orbit. They are already doing, in terms of Navy, what is necessary. And here I'm talking about the commercial shipping activity. That's what need to be developed, okay? For the, when I was talking about the, for example, for the Algeria being a green corridor because we have to give an added value to our natural gas. Exporting natural gas as it is through pipes or through LNG carrier, okay, it is subject to fluctuation in the prices. But if we add value producing methanol from natural gas, ammonia from natural gas, hydrogen from natural gas through the steam methane reforming system, in that case, the fuel the alternative fuel we are producing have an added value. So we can provide. So that's why I'm considering, not for being an Algerian, no, for a fact that the position of Algeria within the Mediterranean and access to Africa has to play its role as energy provider to Europe and, you know, looking back to Africa as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Boumediene. Let me introduce our last speech for the first part of the panel, Adriana Salazar.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a little shorter. There we go. So thank you very much, Luca. Dear colleagues, so distinguished delegates, so it's a real pleasure to join you in La Spezia. I would say really that the opportunity to see the Americo Vespucci alone was already worth the trip, but it's of course a real privilege, a real pleasure to be with you today for this session on the role of Mediterranean ports as key players of the energy transition. So I'm in fact joining you on behalf of Ms. Alessandra Sensi, who's head of sector for environment, green and blue economy at the Secretariat of the Union for the Mediterranean. My name is Adriana Salazar, and I support very specifically the UFM's Sustainable Blue Economy dossier and agenda. So I know that timing is tight, so I'll try to be as concise as possible, and just to give you a very high-level overview of our relevant, let's say, policy framework in support of Mediterranean ports as regards to the energy transition, and all, of course, in the context of our blue economy dossier. So. For those of you who may not know, the Union for the Mediterranean is an intergovernmental organization which brings together 43 member countries, so all of the countries of the European Union, all of the member states of the EU, plus 16 countries from the south and the east of the Mediterranean basin, so from Finland all the way to the north. There we go, thank you. So from Finland all the way to the north, to Mauritania to the south, to Turkey, Palestine, Israel, Jordan to the east of the basin, and including most of the Balkan countries as well, with the mandate, the mission to promote cooperation, dialogue, regional stability, and sustainable development at regional, so Euro-Mediterranean level. It's the only Euro-Mediterranean intergovernmental organization bringing together all of the EU member states and all of the countries from the south and the east of the basin to work together, to cooperate on a basis of equal footing. And this is a concept that's very critical to us. So we work across a number of strategic priorities, across 6 divisions, and our work is steered by a dual co-presidency, helmed, let's say, permanently by the EU to the north of the basin, and currently held by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan to the south. And we are also supported by a small secretariat based in Barcelona. So to give you just a little bit more insight on how we deliver on our mandate, the UFM's work is achieved through what we call the approach or the system of the 3 Ps. So we are, first of all, a forum of high-level political dialogue, which takes the form of ministerial declarations, ministerial meetings, which then the countries work together to implement. So we have indeed very ambitious ministerial declarations across a number of areas, but the key point here is that then we actually work and accompany the 43 member countries on the practical, hands-on implementation of these ministerial declarations. And this implementation is, every ministerial is different, every ministerial declaration is different, but they are supported, underpinned by some sort of, some type of results-based monitoring, reporting, and evaluation mechanism, of course, to measure progress over time. This refers to our multi-stakeholder regional dialogue platforms across our areas of intervention, including, of course, on sustainable blue economy. Here, on this part of our dossier, this takes the form of the UFM's working group on sustainable blue economy, which is composed of focal points from the countries at ministerial level. So depending on the country, this can be representatives from the relevant ministry, maritime affairs, foreign affairs, transport, really depending, of course, of the country, and by a number of observers. And the 3rd P makes reference to projects with direct impacts on the citizens of the region. One important point to understand really how we work is that we don't disperse funds, we don't implement projects directly, but we do support projects in a number of ways. In one aspect, through which you may have heard, our labeling process. So we do label projects, meaning that when a UFM project is labeled, it means that it has received the highest level political endorsement, usually at the level of the ministries, what we call the senior officials of the ministries of foreign affairs of the 43 countries. So it means that a project has received, this very high-level political endorsement and blessing because it is deemed of particular strategic importance for the region, because it meets a certain number of criteria. For instance, because it brings, of course, partners both from the north and south, because it has a high potential for replicability and scaling up. So this is important, I think, to understand how we operate. Another central, I would say, aspect of our mandate, in a way under this 3rd P, but which is actually quite cross-cutting, is our support to the rationalization, convergence, coordination, and channeling at regional level of efforts and of technical and financial resources. And this is an aspect of our work which sometimes is maybe not highlighted enough, because it's very easy to see when it's there, but it's not very obvious when it's there, because it means that we're advancing together as a region and that the different agendas are well coordinated, but it's very obvious when it's not there. And this also touches on or includes a stream of work that is at the heart of the UFM's mandate, which focuses on supporting, on working on the expansion or the opening of EU-led processes, initiatives, programs, EU funding programs to partners and stakeholders from the south and the east of the basin. And here, for instance, I think of the recent, let's say, opening of the Interreg Euromed program to southern and eastern partners, of course under certain conditions, under what they call the associate partner status. So this seems like a small step, but it's really, this is the result of years of negotiations in some cases, and we certainly believe that this is the direction that we need to be heading towards. So as you see, we don't implement projects directly, but in the areas that I have highlighted is where I believe that, let's say, the political power and brokerage power of the UFM really shines through. So in terms of the relevant policy framework, 2021 in particular was really an exceptional year in the UFM, with the strengthening and renewal of commitments by the 43 countries of the UFM across a number of key strategic areas. Namely, 2 important ministerial declarations were adopted. closely addressing or directly relevant, of course, to the topic or to the priority of the energy transition in ports, but also as regards to the sustainability, climate neutrality, zero pollution, circularity of ports, and so on. So first of all, the UFM Ministerial Declaration on Sustainable Blue Economy, adopted in February of 2021, and the 2021 Ministerial on Environment and Climate Action, adopted a bit later that year. And further complementing these two key policy instruments, the UFM Ministerial Conference on Transport took place in early 2023, which also adopted the Regional Transport Action Plan for the period 2021-2027. And what's important to keep in mind here is that taken together, these three policy instruments really mark the unequivocal agreement and political will of the 43 member countries to work together, to cooperate closely to the benefit of the entire Mediterranean basin in the face, of course, of shared and transboundary challenges in order to transition towards climate neutral, green and blue circular economies, fully integrating circularity, of course, the principles of sustainable consumption and production, the needs of the clean and renewable energy transition, of course, and the decarbonization of key blue economy sectors, including, of course, ports and maritime transport. And all of this, I mean, based on the dates in particular of the 2021 ministerials, within the overall context of post-pandemic recovery efforts in the region. And so, since, in fact, the adoption of the first ministerial declaration of the UFM on blue economy, which dates back to 2015, and aligning with key EU and international environmental and climate commitments, so including, among others, of course, the Green Deal, the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, of course, the Barcelona Convention for the Protection of the Mediterranean Sea against Pollution, and the important 2021 European Commission communication on a new approach towards a sustainable blue economy. The adoption of the 2021 UFM Ministerial Declaration on Sustainable Blue Economy has been a landmark effort and achievement in the region, as it strengthens and expands, both in breadth and scope, the joint priority areas on which the countries wish to cooperate on together. So you see the 10 priorities here, and of course one dedicated to sustainable, climate neutral, zero pollution maritime transport and ports. So in line with the wider set of relevant UFM policy instruments that I made reference to earlier, so the UFM Ministerial Environment and Climate Action, the 2023 Regional Action Plan on Transport, but also other relevant ministerials that we won't have time to go into on energy, for instance, or on research and innovation. The 2021 Ministerial on Sustainable Blue Economy really fully embraces the key importance of big and small Mediterranean ports as sustainable, circular, green and blue clean energy hubs, and of course on the importance of promoting and supporting this transformation across the basin. And we do so in a way mirroring the 3 Ps, or the approach of the 3 Ps that I was alluding to earlier. So through cooperation and policy dialogue at regional level, so here I'm referring to the work that's undertaken by the UFM's Working Group on Sustainable Blue Economy, also through other UFM working groups, for instance, on transport, on green shipping, and also through our work with, let's say, a wide range of partners and stakeholders at Mediterranean level, and through our engagement in a wide range of fora at Mediterranean level. For instance, just as an example, in the framework of the Med initiative on the promotion of the support of the promotion of the sustainable blue economy in the Western Mediterranean. So we are, of course, follow closely its technical group on green shipping and sustainable transport, and the West Med Maritime Clusters Alliance for the Mediterranean. So just to give you an example. Another area on which we specifically support this priority, mirroring again the 3 Ps, and this is something that is also very central, let's say, to the mandate and to the mission of the UFM, is by promoting precisely the exchange of experiences, best practices, know-how between the 2 shores of the basin. So this capacity building aspect is really central, and so you can imagine we organize, a wide range of activities, capacity building activities to promote precisely this exchange. So on the diversification of ports and marinas beyond maritime transport, on the promotion of ports, of course, as clean energy communities, and so on. And thirdly, we also support mirroring the 3 Ps, this priority, by supporting the opening, the expansion, of course, as far as possible and when possible, of EU-led processes initiatives to non-EU Mediterranean countries. So here I can think, as I mentioned, of Interreg Euromed, but also the EU mission Restore Our Oceans and Waters and its Mediterranean Lighthouse, the, let's say, maritime spatial planning process at Mediterranean level, the blue finance process at Mediterranean level, in the context of recent MFAF calls, for instance. So all processes in which sustainable, circular, climate neutral, and diversified Mediterranean ports on both shores of the basin either already do or will have a role to play and can certainly stand to benefit from being able to participate in these processes. So I would have wanted to go more in depth into the roadmap for the implementation of the 2021 UFM Ministerial on Sustainable Blue Economy, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to show you this slide in a way to show you that the 10 ministerial priorities that you saw remain. They are the 10 priorities on which the countries are working on with a wide range of stakeholders, steered by our EU and Jordan co-presidency and supported by the UFM Secretariat. They will